Halfland, an ahistorical prehistory. The Battle of Blackcrag Pass. High in the Twilight Mountains was an isolated valley, surrounded by jagged peaks. And in that valley was the dwarvish settlement of Sponheim, home to Svanlaug's folk. In the 161st year of the Common Reckoning, Eldaron led an army of mail-clad elves into those mountains, determined to destroy that settlement. His force comprised some 280 archers, equipped with elven longbows, and 200 elven guard, each with a keen sword strapped at his hip and bearing a round shield. The road to Sponheim was steep and long, winding its way ever upward through the rugged landscape. At last the elves found themselves marching up a steep mountain valley. Small thickets of stunted and twisted trees clung precariously to the sparsely grassed slopes. At the head of the valley loomed a mountain, topped with precipitous black cliffs. To its right rose another summit, bestrewn with boulders. The road passed between the two peaks. This was Blackcrag Pass, the final rampart to be crossed before descending into the valley of Sponheim. And here the elves found the dwarves, waiting for them. Across the path, in well-ordered ranks, stood 300 silent dwarves, clad in finely wrought mail which shimmered silver in the sunlight, holding their round and painted shields rim to rim before them, and above the shield wall glinted the well-honed steel points of stout ash-shafted spears. Svanlaug did not leave her borders unpatrolled. The elven army had been observed as soon as it had emerged from the forest onto the foothills of the Twilight Mountains. Messengers had rushed to Sponheim, and Svanlaug had called the dwarves to arms. Having gathered her forces, she placed them under the leadership of her grandson, Armod. His instructions were simple: eliminate the elves, and so prevent them from reaching Sponheim. Eldaron had not expected to march into Sponheim unopposed. He was ready to fight. He ordered his archers forward, to close within bowshot, and assail the spear dwarves with a deadly arrow storm. He ordered the elven guard to move up behind them, ready to charge in and slaughter the shattered survivors. The elves moved forward to put this plan into effect. But before the archers could get into position to attack the spear dwarves, they themselves came under attack. For Armod's army did not only consist of spear dwarves. He also had 300 dwarves armed with crossbows. He had divided these into 3 companies. One of these companies was concealed among the boulders on the slopes to the elves' right. Another was concealed to the elves' left, in the rocks at the foot of the Black Crags. And the final company was also on the elven left, further down the valley, hidden behind a stand of trees. Thus it was that crossbow bolts began flying at the advancing elven archers from the rocky slopes above them. The archers halted and began to loose arrows back. Although the dwarves were shooting from the cover of crags and boulders, an elven longbow can loose 3 arrows in the time it takes a dwarvish crossbow to shoot 1, and the elves had the better of this exchange. Many of the crossbow dwarves perished. The third group of crossbow dwarves had not yet involved themselves in this fight, but now they emerged from the trees, directly to the left of the elves. Eldaron reacted quickly, sending 100 of the elven guard, under the command of an elf called Rothilion, to deal with them. Further up that side of the valley, the elven archers loosed yet another volley of arrows into the dwarves beneath the Black Crag, and no further crossbow bolts came from that direction. But the crossbow dwarves on the other side of the valley were not done yet. Casualties were mounting among the archers on the elven right, and when a couple of elven officers were killed by well-directed crossbow bolts, a number of archers and some of the elven guard behind them broke and ran. The dwarves cheered mockingly. Eldaron himself fell back, attempting to quell the panic and rally his troops. But if the elven right was in disarray, the elven left was ascendant. Ruthillian led his contingent of elven guard, crashing into the crossbow dwarves in the trees. The dwarves were pushed back, leaving many casualties behind them. Eldaron succeeded in restoring order on the elven right, reforming the guard on that flank around him, and sending the chastened archers forward once more. Having dealt with the dwarves beneath the Blackcrag, the elven archers redirected all their efforts against the dwarvish crossbows on the other side of the valley, effectively neutralising them as a threat. And now Eldaron urged his archers to move up within longbow shot of the spear dwarves and put his initial plan into action. Armod had observed the lethal effects of the elven longbow and had no wish to have them inflicted upon his spear dwarves for any longer than necessary. As the elves came forward, he ordered the shield wall to also advance, intending to close with the elves as quickly as possible and resolve matters hand to hand. On the elven left, Ruthillian and his contingent pushed up the slope, pursuing the crossbow dwarves through the twisted trees. Unable to outrun the elves, the dwarves reformed their ranks on the far side of the wood and charged into the elves as they emerged from the tangled undergrowth. It was a desperate measure, and it did not succeed. The dwarves were cut down, one and all. Back at the pass, the grim-faced spear dwarves marched inexorably forward into a hail of arrows. But no matter how frantically the elves worked their bowstrings, as one dwarf fell, another stepped forward to take his place. The shield wall became increasingly dishevelled, but still the dwarves pushed on, now a ragged horde charging the elven lines. More dwarves fell, but still the dwarvish advance could not be slowed, and now the elven archers started to run short of arrows. Eldaron ordered the elven guard around him to charge through the archers and into the onrushing foe. That was a fierce fight, dwarvish spears against elven swords, but the spears were having the better of it. Ruthillian regrouped his troops and returned through the trees onto the open slope of the valley. From here he had an excellent view as the dwarves pushed the ever-dwindling number of elves slowly back. But maybe it was not too late for Eldaron. Maybe yet the battle could be won. And so Ruthillian raised his horn to his lips and blew 3 blasts upon it, 3 powerful blasts that echoed across the valley from slope to slope. And both dwarves and elves paused from their struggle, looking for the source of this sound, wondering what it entailed. Eldaron took this opportunity to disengage, pulling what was left of his forces back to regroup, and Ruthillian and his troops charged across the valley into the dwarvish flank. Armod saw him coming and shouted orders to his well-drilled spear dwarves, who, at the last moment, managed to form a shield wall. The result was that Ruthillian and his troops crashed headlong into a hedge of dwarvish spears. The lines came together, and then the few survivors of Ruthillian's force were fleeing the field in disorder, leaving their companions' corpses behind them. Eldaron hazarded one last desperate throw of the dice. Even as the wave of Ruthillian's assault broke and flowed back, Eldaron led the elves around him in one last charge into the dwarvish lines. For a moment it appeared that he might have caught Armod off balance, but it was not to be. Once again the dwarves reformed their ranks, and once again an elven attack was blunted and repulsed. But this time the elves did not regather themselves. Instead they fled, leaving the field to the jeering dwarves. Thus ended the Battle of Blackcrag Pass.